Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Amber Nestor, principal broker, firm owner, and founder of TennesseeLandAndHomeStore.com. Today is August 19th, 2026. It's about 8:03 p.m. Eastern, and in this video, I'm going to talk about HOA legal disputes and what's in the best interest of property owners and property owners' rights. We're going to focus on some real case studies, and I would like to preface this video by saying I am not an attorney, but I have studied federal law and state law, and I have studied all kinds of legal case files and filings for many years. I've also done consulting and been a listing agent and a buyer's agent for countless people over the years who owned property or were seeking to purchase property within countless HOAs all across the eastern half of Tennessee, many of these luxury developments and water access developments. So let's talk about it. There's so many things that I've learned about HOAs over the years, and I find it really fascinating. HOAs can have many benefits to property owners. One of the biggest benefits is that you have these layers of rules and restriction that create consistency and stability within the neighborhood. So this helps to protect everyone's investment. It protects everyone's assets because there is consistency and continuity, and you have the whole body of property owners, and then you have the whole body of kind of like the governing rulers per se for the HOA or the POA, which are this group of officials, so to speak, right, that enforce and that regulate and record keep and collect and document and communicate. Okay, so one of the biggest things that I wish more people knew about and understood about HOAs and POAs is, what are your rights? What are your rights as a property owner? Whether you own a piece of land in one of these neighborhoods, or you have a house, or maybe you have a few pieces of land that connect, or maybe you have a few properties that are spread out throughout the neighborhood. So I want you to picture a homeowners association. I want you to picture the neighborhood, okay? Imagine you're looking at the neighborhood from a bird's eye view flying over, and imagine there's an overlay of neon yellow property lines wrapping around every piece of land that's in that neighborhood, okay? So every single piece of land has an owner. It has a deed and it has an owner, okay? And that owner has rights. And the HOA and the POA is supposed to serve what's in the best interest of the neighborhood and the property owners. Just like with a country and a government, a federal government, just like a county and community and your local government, just like a state and your state government, the point of these governing bodies of people is that they're supposed to serve what's in the best interest of the community and of the people that they're supposed to serve, right? So things need to be effective, things need to be beautiful, things need to be taken good care of, and they also need to just be reasonable, right? They need to be affordable. They need to protect what's in the best interest of the people who live there and own there and pay property taxes there and pay HOA fees there and maintain the land there and maintain structures there. So something that happens in HOAs over the years is maybe something changes. Maybe what's popular architecturally changes, okay? One example might be maybe when the neighborhood was first created, they had a rule that said if you're going to have a garage, it has to be attached. And there's going to be no supplemental structures, and there's going to be one home per lot, all right? But then maybe as time progresses and all these decades go by, all these companies start popping up like SummertownMetals.com and Tough Shed, and all of a sudden it becomes this wonderful asset to have these very quickly built and developed supplemental structures that make great workshops and additional space for property owners. They're affordable, they're beautiful, they're high quality, they're often built to residential specs. So one neighborhood I studied years ago, they had done a filing where everyone had their deeds modified and everyone had their the HOA rules and restrictions for the whole neighborhood were modified because several property owners had requested a variance from the HOA and said, hey, this is beautiful. It's enhancing property value. It's enhancing beauty. I don't see anything that's bad about it. It looks great. So let's make it so that everyone can do this because it's an asset to the entire community. It's an asset to each individual property owner. Like, why not? I think that this is rational and reasonable. So when you look through the records of the county records with deeds and rules and restrictions and all these sorts of things, you can see these filings over the years where these original rules and restrictions are modified and amended, and you'll see where it lists every single property owner that existed at that point in time in the neighborhood, and it names them and it identifies their property's location. It might have the address, the parcel ID, the lot number, etc. Okay, so, and it might also reference like the book and page number where their deed is located and things of that nature. So as you can imagine, the larger the neighborhood, the more complex and difficult it could potentially be to get a change to happen in a neighborhood, right? Some neighborhoods might have 100 or 200 lots. Some neighborhoods might have a couple thousand lots, right? So getting hundreds or thousands of people all a letter in the mail, trying to send them certified mail, trying to communicate with them and discuss with them, hey, here's a change that I think that would benefit us all. That's quite time consuming and costly. So this is how it gets to be kind of difficult and sometimes an expensive legal matter to try to make things better or just be reasonable. Or let's say if leadership within the HOA starts just kind of doing things a certain way, and then they do things that way for a few years, and then people throughout the neighborhood find out about it, and some people like it and some people are against it. Maybe it deviates a little bit from original rules and restrictions, or maybe original rules and restrictions for the community are kind of vaguely worded. Maybe when they were drawing up these original documents, they didn't foresee future complexity, and the language that they used originally just wasn't maybe like clear or specific enough to concretely say, well, this is right or this is not right. And then you also have to think about this, right? It's a set of rules and ideas that were created at the start of something because a group of people said, yeah, this sounds pretty good. It doesn't mean that it has to always be that way, right? There used to be slavery in the United States, and it doesn't have to always be that way, right? So anytime there is a rule, a law, a regulation, something of that nature, if it gets to the point where it's very clear it's not serving what's in the best interest of the community and of the property owners, then that's when you end up with these legal disputes that end up in court and everyone's being named in the legal dispute. Recently, I did a consultation with a client who had concerns about legal documents they had received because there's a dispute, and I've seen this kind of dispute pop up in lots of HOAs over the years, where let's say you're a property owner and you own several lots that are side by side. And then let's say you build one house on one of the lots and the rest of the lots connected, you're just using those for grass and trees and beauty, and you're not building a structure on each house. Then maybe you collaborate with the HOA and the county to say, you know what, let's turn this into one lot with one parcel ID, so we just get one tax bill per year. And they also end up asking the HOA, hey, can we just pay one HOA fee per year? Because the way we're using this property is in a manner such that we only have one structure here and the rest we're using as grass and trees, right? So that seems like a pretty reasonable request. Additionally, I find it very reasonable because when you have a larger parcel of land, you are creating a larger space between structures, right? So one can argue that this property owner, while they're asking to pay, to not pay duplicated HOA fees and to not pay duplicated county tax fees, right? They are also enhancing the property values and the value of the community as a whole, because they are creating space that is great for nature, for one thing, but also creates bigger spaces between the primary residences. And that's desirable. That's typically desirable. And I would say that's very much in high demand. Every single buyer that has ever reached out to me in my entire career, with the exception of maybe just 2 or 3, really preferred to have as much privacy and space between neighbors as possible. They wanted to have some trees. They wanted to have yard. They don't want to look out their window and look directly into their neighbor's window, right? The only time I have found that certain buyers wanted a tiny yard and wanted to feel very, very close to their neighbors was in scenarios where they were buying the last house they were ever going to live in. They were preparing to retire or had already retired, and they just wanted to feel very, very, very close to their neighbors. They wanted to have that extreme sense of closeness and connection to their neighbors. So anyway, it's an interesting thing, and there's a case ongoing this year, over the past couple of years really, where a particular HOA, there's a dispute. There's a dispute between leadership within the HOA or POA and these two kind of teams of property owners. Some are saying, you know, well, we've been doing it this way where we're allowing this, what personally I think is fair and reasonable, people who have combined parcels and only one structure to pay one tax bill and to pay one HOA bill every year. And then the HOA wanted to say, well, no, let's say that person has 3 lots. They're trying to say, well, no, that person needs to pay 3 HOA fees, okay? So I think another thing that came up in that particular lawsuit was a matter of voting rights. So I think that, like, if I remember correctly, when they allowed these property owners to combine their lots into one defined lot, they also gave them only 1 vote, right? And that seems kind of fair, because if you're one property owner and you have 1 parcel ID, then it makes sense to have 1 vote, right? And you're paying 1 HOA fee instead of maybe 3 or whatever. So it's kind of like this tug of war going on. Then reading some further information within some of the legal documents for the filings, one of the attorneys had argued, well, how is it reasonable for, leadership within the HOA to say, well, we have to enforce this exactly the way it was originally written, even though the way it was originally written was a little wishy-washy. How can we say that it's reasonable to enforce this so strictly and not consider changing it when for multiple years you've set a precedent of not adhering to this original interpretation? You've let multiple property owners do this lot combination process. And additionally, there's many other examples of rules and restrictions within the HOAs, like bylaws and things, that have also not been adhered to. But you're not taking issue with any of those. And it's coming across, and they're arguing that the HOA is just trying to figure out ways to generate more revenue, and thought that this would be a clever way to do that. Rather than just saying, hey, we're going to, increase it across the board for everyone, they were trying to focus more on these particular property owners. So it's really interesting. I know you could definitely argue fairness from either side, but during times where inflation is quite pressing and the cost of living and running a business is quite increased, people are going to say, hey, now you're going to try to increase things for me even more. after many years we've done it this way, now you want to change it and you know, triple what you're asking of me, etc. So there's argument on both sides there. One thing I would recommend to property owners is you need to always be very observant of what's happening with your HOA. So many people will buy land in an HOA and think, oh, you know, I'm going to do something with this down the road. If not, then I'll sell it, whatever. But you need to really take time to look at what's going on with the HOA, with HOA leadership, with rules. When they're sending you updates about your gate codes, when they're sending you letters in the mail, you know, have somewhere that you store all of those things and keep them in chronological order. HOAs can be really, really wonderful, but sometimes they can be a real pain. So it just depends. It depends on the HOA. And it also kind of depends on just how you look at things, how you analyze things, how you personally go with the flow of life. You know, if you're considering buying property in an HOA, it's a really great idea to talk to a bunch of people that own homes there and ask them, you know, people who've owned homes there for a long time, and ask them, what's it like to own a home here? Are you happy with the HOA, or do you hate the HOA, and why? You know, find out, because once you own property there, you're going to be dealing with them. There's some HOAs throughout East Tennessee, one in particular, I'm not going to say what county it's in, I'll tell you it's not in Roane County. But I had gone to do consultations for several people that built homes in this particular neighborhood, and they absolutely hated their HOA. They felt like people in leadership in the HOA had misled them about things. They felt like the HOA was being so incredibly nitpicky about things that it was extremely over the top. They felt like rules that were imposed by the HOA were just above and beyond ridiculous. And one of the ways you can help protect yourself from those kinds of things is, before you buy property in an HOA, you need to have copies of all the rules and restrictions and documents and bylaws. You also need to attempt to communicate with the leadership of the HOA. You should get names and contact information for all of them. You should find out how often they hold meetings. You should see if they're friendly and how they communicate with you, if they're respectful and how they communicate with you. You should look at their fee schedules. You should look at the history of their fee schedules. You should look at their spending reports for the previous 2 years and their budget and spending plans for the next 2 years. These are things that you need to know because they could impact you. And if speaking to the people that are in leadership or trying to is a bad experience, maybe don't buy in that neighborhood. Also keep in mind that those people have to communicate with a large number of individuals, and it might take some time to get a response, and not to take offense at that. So to be very patient in that regard. But yeah, those are some things that I wish more people knew and understood about HOAs. I have several HOAs that I'm totally obsessed with. I absolutely love. I think they're so beautiful. The developments are so gorgeous. They're so well run. Everything is just top notch all the time. Another thing that you should consider is like, okay, worst case scenario, how could this go living in this HOA? What would be worst case scenarios? Are those situations that you're cool with? Are they just not that big a deal? Or are you somebody that is going to be really bothered by if that happens or that happens or that happens? And you just have to, you know, decide. But looking at those documents before you make an offer, before you pick out a lot, really imperative, very important. You'll be glad that you did. If you have an agent that loves to read long, legal, boring documents like me, they might just do some quick analysis for you, kind of give you the rundown, tell you some things that you might want to consider, point out some sections that you ought to maybe read over yourself. Inform you about some other sections, save you some time. But I'm trying to think what other things I might squeeze into this audio video kind of thing here about HOAs. Here's an example, okay? There was an HOA many years ago. It was in the process of developing, and one of the main leadership people passed away. So this, of course, was a huge problem. There were sections of roads that did not finish getting developed. There were power lines that didn't finish getting put in. There were water lines that didn't get extended. All kinds of things. So, but those are more issues with the development, the initial development. Once an HOA is finished, complete, established, been there for a few years, lots of homes there, your major stuff has just already happened. It's mainly about it just continuing to exist and exist well, right? So, yeah, those are some other factors to think about. Anytime you receive advertising, especially if you're out of state, if you receive advertising about new lots being for sale in an HOA or in a development in East Tennessee, don't feel rushed or pressured to jump at the so-called fire sale opportunity to acquire one of those lots. The fact is, a wise investment is one that is well thought through and analyzed. So reach out to an agent, someone who's highly experienced like myself, who can say, here's your best and worst case scenarios. Here's the best and worst things that might happen to you if you do this, and maybe I can get you a better deal. So that's a really important thing to consider. I can't tell you how many times over the span of my career I've done free consultations for folks who lived out of state and over the past several decades received advertising at some point in their life from a development in Tennessee and went to an event and felt pressure to purchase. And when I look at and study what people were paying during that event to buy property, the ranges are just all over the place. And there were tons of purchases happening with no real estate agent involved whatsoever. And these were buyers buying directly from developers. So it's just always great to have someone in your corner to help make sure you're getting treated fairly, getting a reasonable deal, getting what you think you're getting. One of the worst things I ever saw, and again, I'm not going to name names or locations, but decades ago there was a development, and there was a person who bought a piece of property and they were lied to about their water rights. In fact, they had saved from an in-person meeting with a developer or someone on the developer's team. And again, I'm not going to say where in the state of Tennessee this occurred, but they had saved handwritten notes from the day they purchased the lot directly from the developer's team, hand-drawn diagrams that were indicating water rights that they did not actually have. And then later on, decades down the road, found out through having a consultation with me and me doing verifications through TVA and the County Roads Department and others, that they could not do with their waterfront what they had been told they could do. And so now they were presented with this horrible surprise and obstacle of trying to sell their piece of land and realizing it was not as competitive or marketable as they had been led to believe. So, and the person that they sat down with at that table that day might not have even lied to them intentionally. They might have genuinely thought they were giving them accurate information. We'll never know. But this is why it's always good to have an agent that advocates for you, that's extremely experienced, that's going to dot the I's and cross the T's and double check the details, because at the end of the day, you're the one that has to handle that asset. If a mistake is made, you're the one that has to bear the burden of going, okay, wow, we're going to take a loss. Okay, wow, this isn't what we thought. This was a bad investment, right? One thing that I always try to do to encourage people I do consultations with, there was a gentleman I did a consultation with earlier today. He had purchased a property. Again, I'm not going to name names or locations. This was in a county outside of Roane County. It's not Roane County. But he had purchased a property when markets were kind of peaking right after COVID hit. And what I mean by peaking was sellers were fetching much higher prices than had typically been seen in recent marketplace, events. So he had purchased something, he'd paid quite a lot for it, and now he's tried to sell it. He tried to sell it for a couple of months with another agent from another firm, and I think he said did not have a single showing. So we probably talked, I don't know, maybe for an hour about all the complexities of what has happened in the markets, in the real estate markets throughout Eastern Tennessee from about 2018 until now, and what I speculate is going to happen in the next 2 to 10 years. So, he and I had a really great conversation, and he said, I've kind of suspected the things that you're explaining and that you're confirming, and it feels really nice to hear a professional say the things that I've been suspecting. He said, honestly, he said he feels like a lot of agents either don't know how to speak about these topics in a knowledgeable way, or they're not well informed on these topics, or they're not good at analyzing these factors, or he said sometimes he feels like maybe they're a little misleading. So he says that it's just really nice to speak to someone who is so honest and frank. And I said, well, that's the way I run my business. I tell people the truth. I tell people what I think the real best and worst case scenarios are, genuinely. And when we do that, then we can do damage control, right? We can create the best possible outcome while facing the challenge in the most realistic way possible. And I said, the most important thing to remember when you feel like you've made a bad investment, or you feel like you're going to take a loss, or your calculations are showing you that you're losing, okay, is this: money earned quickly is more valuable than money earned slowly. And so instead of focusing on this horrible negative feeling of looking at these calculations and viewing them as a loss, think about this: the quicker you recoup as much of that bad investment as you can, that money that you have back in hand is now liquid. It's a liquid asset that you can then invest in something else and then grow, and then maybe recuperate and exceed what you ever could have, contemplated potentially being able to get out of this other asset, right? So try to always think about what the potential is of the recouped funds, rather than, letting it get you down that, the calculations are showing a loss. Because once you recoup and you have liquidated that asset, there's potential there. There's a lot of potential there. And figuring out a way to grow that potential is one of my favorite things to do. So anyway, we're hitting about 30 minutes now. I hope you learned something new about real estate. A lot of people are trending towards wanting to find unrestricted land. At some point in the future, I'll probably make a video about what that means. What does unrestricted land mean? And how unrestricted can land be? And is there any such thing as truly unrestricted land? The answer is complicated. There's lots of layers, and it varies from county to county and region to region. But it's one of my favorite topics to talk about because I love analyzing highest and best use of property and development potential. Anyway, this is a long video. I hope you have a great day. If you have questions about buying or selling real estate in Tennessee, send me a text at 865-617-4783. Again, that's 865-617-4783. Have a great day. See you next time.